Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission, as always, is pretty simple. We take source material, could be research, notes, texts, and turn it into sharp, usable knowledge for you. Today, we're reviewing a very focused deep dive. We've got this collection of psychological observations about male behavior, their emotional life. It's curated in the source we're calling a psychological primer on men.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. This isn't some huge sociological study. What's really unique here is how specific the source is, like shockingly specific, down to exact times, really definitive judgments. Our job isn't just to list these facts. We want to analyze what they imply about relationships, communication, self-perception for men. What kind of social friction points are these numbers trying to get at?
Exactly. And it's important, this primer presents things with, well, incredible precision. They often sound more like sound bites, maybe, than universally proven data. So our task is to dig into what the source is suggesting, why these claims might resonate with some people, and what kind of overall picture they paint. We sort of group the material into three main buckets. First, communication dynamics and intimate relationships. Second, how men present themselves externally, factors of attraction. And third, this internal tension between perceived strength and vulnerability.
Right. Let's start there with the intimacy and communication claims, because some of these are really specific, maybe even surprising. The primer kicks off with a pretty classic observation, doesn't it, about what happens after physical intimacy. It draws a very clear line, claims that, right after sex, men tend to want to sleep, whereas women often want to talk. That sets up a kind of fundamental difference right away.
It does. And what's fascinating is how the source connects that behavior directly to, well, emotional expression. If men often withdraw into sleep, then how are they showing their emotional connection? The primer suggests that men express their deepest feelings, not so much verbally afterwards, but actually through the act itself, the art of making love, as it puts it. So that raises a really interesting question, doesn't it? Is the source implying that for men, physical intimacy is a primary way, maybe a nonverbal channel, for getting across complex emotional stuff they might struggle to say?
That definitely reframes it. It's not just connection. It's like functional emotional communication for them.
Yeah.
A necessary channel. And if that's how they communicate their strongest feelings, well, it leads us straight to how they handle verbal communication. And this is where things get really interesting, maybe a bit controversial.
Yeah, this is where the primer brings in that statistic, the one about attention span in relationships. It's almost hard to believe. It claims men can listen to their male friends for, well, ages, long conversations, practical stuff. But when it's their girlfriend or wife talking, the source claims they have a very specific, very short window, 6 minutes.
6 minutes. Wow. That number, it feels like it's designed to provoke, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's so precise. It makes you stop and think, okay, is this supposed to be biological? Or is it learned behavior, like something about how useful they perceive the conversation to be? Does the source give any clues?
Well, it doesn't explicitly state one single cause, biological or social, but the contrast is the key thing they highlight. If they can listen to male friends for ages, that suggests they can pay attention for long periods. But maybe when the conversation is, say, goal-oriented, problem-solving, focused on a shared task.
Right. Practical stuff.
Exactly. Whereas when a partner speaks, the primer seems to imply the conversation often shifts, maybe towards processing emotions, relationship dynamics, just general sharing, stuff that isn't about fixing an immediate problem.
Okay, so less tangible.
Perhaps. And if we take that 6-minute claim, maybe not literally down to the second, but as a kind of metaphor, it could imply a really sharp cutoff in tolerance for communication that they see as, well, maybe not useful in an immediate practical sense, or communication that requires a lot of emotional effort without a clear endpoint.
So they're like solution-focused listeners. And once it moves into pure emotional processing, the clock starts ticking.
That seems to be the implication. That internal clock starts ticking down fast once the problem-solving angle disappears.
That distinction, solution-focused versus processing-focused, that's a really useful way to think about it, much more than just the 6-minute rule itself. So if you combine that idea, the nonverbal intimacy expression, with this really short attention span for relationship talk, the primer seems to paint a picture of, I guess, highly defended communication, where words, especially emotional ones from a partner, maybe aren't seen as the most efficient tools.
It suggests a kind of guardedness, a time limit in very specific contexts.
Which must affect how they present themselves to the world too, right? That guardedness. Should we shift gears and look at that? How these internal things translate to, like, social presentation, attraction factors?
Absolutely. Makes sense. How you connect, or maybe don't connect, emotionally inside often shapes the image you project outside. And the source gives some very specific, tangible markers for attraction it claims men respond to. It reports that most men apparently really value and are attracted to women with thicker and longer hair.
Interesting. That's very visible, very traditional.
It is. And you do see this pop up in studies sometimes. People often link it back to, maybe deeply ingrained evolutionary signals, vitality, health, that sort of thing. But notice how concrete it is. A measurable physical trait. It fits with that overall emphasis on the tangible that seems to run through this primer.
Yeah, that preference for the tangible definitely carries over when it looks at how men present themselves. The source goes right from hair to the male wardrobe. It cites psychological facts of the male study, claims there's a clear difference in perceived attractiveness based on clothing.
What does it say specifically?
That males wearing shirts, collared, buttoned, structured tops look more attractive than guys wearing T-shirts.
Okay. So structure equals attractiveness.
Apparently.
Yeah.
I mean, putting aside the comfort factor of a T-shirt, this isn't just fashion advice, is it? It feels like an observation about perceived effort or maybe status. What's the psychology there, do you think?
Well, it seems to tap into that connection between structure and social appeal. A structured shirt kind of inherently suggests more effort, maybe. More seriousness, professionalism, perhaps.
Like a visual shortcut.
Exactly. A quick visual shorthand for competence, maybe adherence to certain social norms. If you put that together with the attraction to tangible markers like long hair and this preference for structured self-presentation like shirts, you see this consistent theme emerging. Perceived value seems heavily tied to clear external signals in this source material.
Okay. External signals. Which leads right into another point they make, doesn't it? A major relationship friction point.
Yes, the comparison issue. The source really emphasizes this. It says men reportedly hate it if any female compares them to other males, especially their partner.
Hate it. Strong word.
Very strong. So putting the pieces together. The primer suggests the male presentation is geared towards showing structured competence, the shirt. But at the same time, their internal sense of self is maybe highly vulnerable to being measured externally and found wanting, particularly by their partner.
So why is that comparison from a partner so devastating, according to this view? What's the theory?
Well, that strong reaction, that hatred of comparison, it really highlights the tension we talked about between projecting self-sufficiency on the outside and maybe an internal need for unique validation from that core relationship. If a partner compares them, it doesn't just question their effort, it potentially pulls the rug out from under that whole framework of competence they're trying to project.
So the comparison feels like a direct hit on their ability to be good enough in the relationship.
That seems to be the implication, an attack on their perceived role, which could be crushing for an identity built, as this primer suggests, on perceived strength and competence.
It sounds like a very externalized sense of self-worth that needs constant guarding. Which I guess brings us perfectly to our last section. The internal stuff, vulnerability.
Indeed. Now we have to turn inward and tackle what is probably the source's most blunt claim, provocative even. It defines a lot of the behavior that follows. The source makes this really stark judgment about emotional and physical makeup. It states quite clearly that men are physically strong, but are described as emotionally weak compared to women.
Wow. Okay, that's a really loaded statement. Weak. We probably need to unpack that term carefully. What the primer seems to be getting at here, maybe it's not about inherent fragility, but perhaps a specific difficulty in, verbalizing or processing complex emotions, maybe prioritizing stoicism over actually expressing need.
Precisely. It seems less about fragility and more about a perceived lack of flexibility or articulation in the emotional sphere, according to this source. So if we take the source's framing that the male emotional toolkit, let's say, is less articulated or flexible, how does that core idea show up in behavior?
Well, it connects directly to that other claim they make, doesn't it? About asking for help.
Exactly. The claim that men hate asking for help most of the time.
Right.
That they'll actively avoid saying they need help until they feel like they literally cannot manage on their own anymore.
Yeah, it's the absolute last resort.
Which is almost a textbook example of that internal struggle we were just discussing, right? If their perceived strength is all tied up with competence and self-reliance, the shirt dynamic again, then asking for help is
admitting failure.
Directly admitting failure. It undermines the whole identity structure that the primer suggests they're relying on. So not asking for help becomes a defense mechanism. It protects that maybe fragile sense of competence.
It creates this really challenging loop, though. According to this primer, they're claimed to have less articulated emotional resilience. They express deep feelings non-verbally, through intimacy. They avoid verbalizing needs or asking for help until crisis point, and they might check out a verbal processing with a partner after just 6 minutes. That whole picture suggests some serious communication bottlenecks, especially when a problem needs shared, ongoing, verbal, emotional work.
Definitely. And if you connect all those dots, the nonverbal expression, avoiding help seeking, the supposed emotional difference, it starts to explain why, in this model, conflict resolution might often default to either withdrawal
Right, shutting down.
or maybe even trying to reconnect physically through intimacy rather than through verbal negotiation or showing shared vulnerability. The whole system seems designed to sidestep having to actually say, I need help or I'm struggling.
This has been, well, a really fascinating and definitely very specific deep dive into the claims from this primer. So just to quickly recap the 4 main takeaways we pulled out for you, the listener. First, that 6-minute listening window idea, suggesting a big difference between solution-focused talk and emotional processing. Second, the claim about men expressing their deepest feelings non-verbally through making love. Third, that external preference for structured clothing, like shirts, signaling appeal. And fourth, that core internal struggle shown by the intense resistance to asking for help.
Yeah, those are the key points from the source. And maybe here's a final thought, something for you to chew on, based purely on these observations we've discussed. If the male psyche, as described in this specific primer, sees asking for help as weakness and relies heavily on nonverbal ways to show emotional depth, what kind of systems or maybe cultural shifts would even be needed? Shifts to maybe redefine competence so that seeking and receiving help could actually be seen as an act of relational strength instead of personal failure. That's just something to maybe think about or notice in the communication dynamics you see around you.
That's a really compelling question to end on. Forces you to think beyond just listing the claims and into, well, what could change? What are the applications? Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into this particular source material. We'll catch you next time.